how to stop it? Uh, well,
Welcome to
hello, this is
Echoes of
Steve
Change.
O'Loughlin and Mindy Schrager with Echoes of.
Of change.
So, today we thought because it is Father's
Father's
Day,
Day.
we wanted to do a little exploration on fathers and the impact on our system, our family system, on our personal lives. And before we do it, I want to just extend a gratitude to all fathers, whether you know them, like them, want them, have them. You do have one and only one father. If you want to call them sperm donor, whatever, you have one father, one mother. Those are the ones we're talking about today.
You wouldn't be here without them.
That is correct. Because they gave us the one thing, actually, that is the big deal, which is life. That's it. So with that, they play a pretty important role in our existence. So, but it's a mixed, I mean, we can talk about it a little bit. It's sort of a mixed blessing sometimes, right? Because we may not like our fathers or some things about our fathers or whatever the story may be,
But they may not like us.
or they may not like us and whatever might be going on. And and it may not be, and likely isn't, your fault, right? So it's interesting to kind of look at what happens in a system with the father.
Yeah,
Right.
and I spent a little bit of time looking at some patterns that I've seen.
Yeah, let's talk
And,
about that.
and then I also know you have an interesting story to share.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen several instances in which there's an absent father, and that has an influence on people going forward. Sometimes they were rejected, and so they have difficulty with relationships. So that was a pattern that's a pattern I've seen more than once. I've also seen situations where the father has. It's not just the father, but sometimes in this case we're talking about fathers. So fathers having affairs or secret relationships, secret families. I've seen some of those as well, and that actually puts a burden on the children because as we know in systemic work, what you exclude has to find a way to be included.
Well, you might want to say a couple of words about this because people who are listening to this and that don't really know anything about maybe constellation work, right? What does it mean exclude, and what are we talking about?
Right, and so they didn't listen to the previous one or any others.
Well, they may not have, and as you and I know, it takes a few
You have to
rounds,
hear.
and it's a gift that keeps on giving, so it never really ends. So maybe explain it to them a little.
Okay. So in the systemic world, there are three core principles. One of them is that everything has a right to belong, and anything that is excluded will find a way to expand and replicate until it is included, which is basically loyalty to the family soul, saying, if you leave me out, I'm going to find a way to come back in to create this family system. So we see that, for instance, I always bring up the example of in Encanto, the song "We Don't Talk About Bruno."
Oh, I don't know anything about this.
Yes, it's a Disney movie where they have a relative, and the song actually is "We Don't Talk About Bruno," and so again, we just find patterns. So if there's a pattern of secrets, those secrets have to find a way to come back into the system. If there's a parent that so say there's a father you don't like, and so you reject him, and you talk badly about him, then the system's going to find a way to bring him back in.
So say some of the ways that the system, what does it mean the system brings him back?
Well, it may be that the pattern of rejection repeats generation after generation until someone
Meaning that, so for example, if I reject a father or something, then
and
my
you'll keep
kids.
the next generation. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's one way.
Yeah.
What are some other ways?
Oh, there are lots of different ways. What are some of the ways you've seen?
Well, I mean, I always kind of find this is like super cool. And the thing that this family constellation business is so different than anything else is that I always thought, what the hell are they talking about excluding? I mean, who
Yep.
cares, right? And so something gets excluded by either ignoring, killing, accidentally killing, sending them
Rejecting.
off to a
Yep.
mental institution, sending them off, just don't think about it, whatever it is, right? So they are out of that system in the minds of the people, but they're never out. You cannot be out. That's the thing. So, but you're out of this system.
Right. And I've actually started telling people, like, there are families where there are individuals who are not healthy to have relationships with. And so I've said to people, I understand you need to have a boundary. At the same time, you need to acknowledge whether that's, you need to acknowledge that person. So maybe the father rejected you. You still need to acknowledge him as your father and then find a different way to have a relationship. So you're shifting what we would call the family system, but you're acknowledging the role that person had in your life. Or you could have a sibling. I mean, I've seen several instances of people with siblings where the sibling has mental illness or other things that just make the relationship not a good relationship, not a healthy relationship to have. And so it's about finding how do you include them while not having a relationship. So it's about in that case, it's about boundaries. I mean, I have a specific example for me. It's not father related, but one where I was replicating a pattern of an aunt who died young by wanting to leave early until I saw the pattern and realized that wasn't the path I wanted to choose.
Yeah, and and it's very interesting. And this is where it gets so tricky. And I don't know of any other way that really gets to the point of this, which is it's a subtle thing. Somebody gets excluded.
Yep.
And then it may be generations later when they don't even
Exactly.
talk about that crazy aunt or whatever, whatever was out there. Because these people have been excluded, not part of the system, somebody later will try to bring them back in strange ways. And this is where it gets interesting. By being sick like them, dying like them, dying for them, paying a debt for them, getting bankrupt for them, whatever kind of thing is. Or it's like
excluding themselves.
Well, that's true, but they're trying to bring them back. That's the whole point. It's like these exclusions have consequences. The soul wants to bring back that excluded person in some kind of not functional way for that person, and it isn't that person's job to bring them back. But that is that's the consequence of these exclusions. That unless that is being dealt with, it gets repeated and gets worse from generation to generation to generation. And our kids, their kids, somebody continues to pay a price for something that wasn't theirs to begin with.
Well, and you say it's not their job to bring it in, but it's their role in the family. They're speaking on behalf of the family soul to bring it back in. So in some ways, it is their job just because they're working to make the family system whole again.
In that sense, it's true. If they have the knowledge, capacity to look at that and bring them back.
Right.
But the problem is that these things are so unconscious in the families that it just keeps going. It keeps going, keeps going. And people wonder, man, we all sort of like this, and we kind of think that's just our family or our family's story or whatever. But don't have to be, right?
Yeah, you can change it. And I think, that's again why we have the name Echoes of Change, because what you're talking about is something that's echoing from the past until we see it and choose to change it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So, but this is about now fathers.
Right.
So,
So those are some of the situations I've seen with fathers. I mean, I really didn't spend a lot of time looking at my father. My grandfathers actually showed up more profoundly in terms of decisions they made that had influence on my family system. But I know you've shared that you can very clearly see some of what you acquired from your father's patterns, and be interesting for you to share with the audience what that is.
Yeah, so I will say I love my father dearly. He was a really, really great guy. Very funny, cute, and all. And he didn't, how to say this nicely, he hadn't quite worked out this relationship with women in general. So, in a maybe not so nice term, you might call him a mama's boy. There's a particular pattern about, okay, how do I feel about women? It's like a bit of a codependency kind of thing. Nonetheless, this was somebody who didn't really know how to really show up for women with everything they bring. And in particular with me, too much women, femininity, whatever you want to call it, as a little kid. I remember this. Little kid, with the tutu trying to dance around and all kinds of stuff. He really wanted to be there for his little daughter, but he didn't really know how to be with him. He was like, yeah, no. So a bit avoidant, just couldn't quite get over himself. That was his story, learned from all kinds of things. So the impact that had on me, though, was that I was looking for this kind of man who wasn't exactly available. The usual stories, like you try to get this all worked out with somebody else who then also can never work it out because they're looking for you to do the same thing that you are trying to get to do with them.
It's very complicated.
That did not work out. So all the men in my entire life, even though they didn't look like my dad, I missed that entirely. They were all like it, all a little bit unavailable in a certain kind of way, just like my sweet dad. And I didn't really get this in sort of a full body sense until I did this work. And I was actually getting ready to write this book about why all these men are idiots.
You found out that wasn't necessarily the cause.
And then I'm realizing, now wait a minute. How come I always just end up with these kind of people? The common denominators may be me, right?
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more, because you mentioned mama's boy. And so I'm just curious how you see that leading to him being what you said is emotionally unavailable.
Well, I think that we can
just a little
relate to patterns between the parents, like a pleasing kind of helping kind of, not free to be actually a man. Okay. So it was just kind of like, okay, I gotta be that for them but whenever you kind of do these kind of internal deals, you're not actually free to own everything yourself and be a man. And inside, the consequences of something not being free is that then somewhere in there you are angry about it and you lash out at the wrong kind of thing. But he felt like, okay, he needed to be basically kind of a bit narrowed down and be like, okay, let's just be sure that we don't aggravate the neighbors, we're all following the rules, whatever. For a long time, I thought that was just a German thing. It's not really.
So it was his.
Yeah. I mean, so for that. But then, as a kid, recipient of somebody with that, what are my choices? So I'm like, well, okay, I can either go along with it, which is, for the most part, I did. But then I really tried to break out of this stuff, right? I'm like, So what's the consequence? Then I'm like, I'm fighting against the men, I have authority issues, I do everything myself, I don't ask for help. Like, that was always funny. My dad couldn't ask for help, right? Because it was like, no, he had to be the man. But so we go into the store looking for a jacket he wanted to buy. He didn't want to ask for any help. He says, why don't you ask? I'm like, hell no, I'm not. You ask. We didn't. We wander around blindly for 2 hours, don't find the jacket, get out, didn't get what we needed, but at least we didn't ask for help.
So is that a pattern that you continued to carry?
It is so hard for me to ask for help. I have learned to outsmart myself by calling it assistance. If I ask for assistance, okay, this gets a little bit better. But it's been very hard for me to ask for help because of this pattern that I then became a daddy's boy, a daddy's girl. Interesting, right? So it's the pattern that gets passed down.
Mm-hmm.
That gas. Now, my mom had no problem asking for help. Zero. Unfortunately, she died, and I didn't have enough exposure time with her. But I inherited that thing full blown.
So when you talk about that, you shifted it from asking for help to, is it asking for assistance or is it some other form of it? Because what I hear is that, in a term that we also use systemically, is that you found a way to stretch the family system. So you're still loyal to the system, but you found a way to do it somewhat differently.
Yeah, that's really a good point, and that's actually that we ought to maybe, pause for a moment in this, because the thing about the systems is we don't want to break them or leave them, and people are always like, but I belong. That's maybe for another podcast. But the thing is that I learned a lot from this, and so we expand it by saying, oh, hey, look at this, And I learned this from my kids, fortunately, who were not shy at all about asking for help and all. And I thought, it's actually kind of smart. These kids get it done fast. I kind of want that. But they don't seem to have any problem asking for that. Wonder what I could do so we could have that. And it's really made a big difference for me. So expanding the system by including this rather than rejecting ended up with more freedom, which is the whole thing, right? Growing the system, freedom, and ultimately makes for many more options for you to live.
So would you say there are other things that you can see as patterns that you acquired from your dad?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, we're sort of clones in so many ways. It's not stuff you don't really want to see, but this whole avoidant thing and this caretaking thing and definitely not asking for directions or instructions and learning everything yourself. Now, my dad, who went on the side of conforming, more like, okay, these are the rules, I think I'd be safer in the rules, I would take the hell with that, I want out of this. But I'm doing the same thing because I'm using that as a reference point. So, right? So it's in so many ways, and there were so many good things that I actually really learned. I mean, part of this, what I sometimes called not taking a stand, a bit of a sissy attitude, was actually a certain kind of wisdom he had. He had this wisdom about, okay, sure, we can get hung up on this thing, but the wisdom of not taking a side and being stuck on the side. And the ability to kind of navigate the center. It's like
the middle.
The middle. Being in the world, but not of it. And I'll tell you this story. He had this movie, The Bridge of the River Kwai, his favorite movie. I never understood what the hell was so good. He always made me play this song as a kid on the accordion. I hated that. But then he started to pay me for it, so I played it. But when he died a few years back, I thought, okay, at his funeral, he really liked the song. I'll play the song at his funeral. I got my accordion out, I practiced it, I recorded it, and then I thought, well, you know what, I ought to watch this movie to see maybe what is this all about.
Yeah.
And it's actually a very interesting movie, but at the end of the day, at the absolute end, there is the physician who everybody is in the war, but he kind of walks out in this center line, the one that's not in it or of it, and everybody behind him dies. And he just says it's madness. And that was the essence of my dad, something that I definitely got from him when I had for a very long time thought that is a sissy way of being. It was actually very, very wise to be able to say, okay, yeah, I can do this too, and this, the physician in the movie healed anybody. He treated everybody. It didn't matter which side, whether you were the enemy or what, it didn't matter. That was it. And all of a sudden understood a bit of my father's attempt to do this that I never really quite saw that way. But that's really what it is in these family fields and the systems, that the change is possible when you're not stuck in it.
Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting point, because sometimes it takes us a while to see. And sometimes it can just be I remember someone who asked the question about what would you consider your leadership style? And I would consider my leadership style collaborative. And then I thought, who was my role model for collaborative growing up? It was my dad. You know, his employees loved him because he really cared about listening to what they had to say and valuing them. And then more recently, I did a presentation on self-care, and I brought in some systemic work to see what are the obstacles to people's self-care. And after I did it, I was like, well, I have some, I could improve my self-care practice. And who was my anti-self-care role model but my dad? So I think it's important to note that sometimes the patterns that we inherit are small. Sometimes they're really big. Sometimes they're subtle. And sometimes we don't see them for a while. But the most important thing is to realize that we do inherit patterns from our fathers, in this case, as we're talking about dads on Father's Day. And the other side is that they can be influenced by other members. Like you talked about your dad being influenced by his mother. I know my dad was also influenced by his mother. So it's important to look at what are the influences, both on us and on our parents. And in this case, our dear dads.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, we're not in a vacuum here. Everything impacts everything. But fathers have a very specific role, right? I mean, there's a couple of things. Fathers their role as a parent is it to help their children and show them how to function in the world. Mm-hmm. Their function is not primarily in the beginning, that's the mothers. Okay? But the fathers is technically their role to do this. And the other thing for girls is girls learn from the mothers how to be with men, and boys learn from the fathers to be with women. So whether you say stuff or write stuff, whatever, the kids don't care what you say. I mean, my kids don't care what I say. They watched me, and if I was not congruent with what I said, I was written off. And I did the same thing. I'm sure you did too, right? I mean, in a certain
so tell
kind
me
of way.
what you mean by it doesn't matter what you say, because I know we pick up systemic sentences that we hear growing up. So from that point of view, it does matter what people say.
Well, it does, and you're right. It does matter what we say. But if I'm saying don't smoke,
and you're smoking, yeah,
right?
Exactly.
What is she saying?
Don't do what I'm doing.
That's what I kind of probably more what I meant to say is. Yeah, we are a role model by what we say, and they do pick it up unconsciously. But if we are not really doing what we're saying, it has, limited, probably way more limited. Although I don't, it's a good question about the words we do say become sort of the systemic trances of our systems that we live.
Well, I mean, it also brings up another point, is that, and you talked about your daughters and how they do ask for help, something that you didn't learn growing up. But so one of the questions will be, what's the influence of their father?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it's another interesting. That's maybe for another, because we're kind of coming to the end of our little podcast right now to say, okay, we're going to look at it's one thing to talk about our fathers. What if we are the recipient? Like, this is better for mothers in a way, because I know, like, oh, it's one thing to talk about my mother, it's another one to be the mother. That's a different level, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how to deal with the gender things, and it is different for same gender separation thing in the developmental stages. Girls separating from mothers has a different level of complexity because it's the same gender, right? So the separation that's part of the normal developmental stages from fathers for girls is different than that for mothers. That's why the same gender parent has a different challenge because of the complexity of it's the same gender. So when I am trying to be autonomous as a person, but it's also the same gender, and I also have to separate from something that's more similar. But that may just be taken it too far from this. But I mean, I'm kind of looking at the time and I'm saying, wow, we're all at the end of our 30 minutes, and we could be talking for the next 10 days.
Yeah, we do have a few more minutes.
So, I mean, do you have any good final words of pearls of wisdom that you wanted to maybe put out about this?
As I was thinking about the influence of my father, I didn't really start looking at my father's stuff until a few years ago. Most of my thing was looking at my mother. But I did do really impactful work around my grandfathers and decisions that they made about keeping the family alive. And I think it's important that we not only honor fathers, but their fathers as well. I mean, this work is about looking at 7 generations back. So sometimes you may not see a pattern in your immediate father, but you may see a pattern several generations back. So that's important to keep in mind as well, because for me, two of the most powerful pieces of work I did were what I call the lessons of the great-grandfathers. So,
yeah, and that's kind of the whole thing about the systems, is that they reverberate through the systems, through the generations. And that's why it's so tricky, because it's not always obvious, because it wasn't in the generation just before, but it could go a few generations back where you don't have any actual information.
Right, and sometimes, again, to look at it from the perspective of it may not make sense to us,
Yes.
but they lived in a different circumstance, and so to really honor the decisions that they made or why certain patterns were established for them. And one of the ways that we can honor them, in addition to thanking them for giving us birth, is to honor the patterns, and then if the patterns are not really functional in our lives, is to ask permission to do something different. So, you found a way, you mentioned the asking for help versus asking for assistance. You found a way to, basically ask permission from your dad to do something different, and now you can ask for assistance, which is really allowing help in. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to do more work about this or learn more about it, where should they go? What could
Well, we're soon going to have a website called echoesofchange.info, and both of us are on there with links to our websites, so they can reach out to one or both of us.
Cool.
And then they can also listen to the next podcast, which will be about mothers.
All right. Well, with that, happy Father's Day.
Yes,
to
happy
all
Father's
fathers
Day.
in us.
Any final words from you?
No, just I want to thank my dad specifically.
Happy Father's Day, Dad.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.